You're listening to Chuck Talks. Two guys, two subjects with no script, little editing, and zero filter. Let's get to it.
Hey, so Chuck Talk, number something I don't even know.
8, but whatever.
Chuck Talk 8, I just learned.
Million.
So I'm actually talking about how I was telling a story about how I got overserved with none other than Esta Mano de Piedra, Roberto Duran, the famous, probably top 5 greatest pound-for-pound boxer in the world. I just learned he has the coronavirus. And him and I got a little ham-dizzled a few times in Panama City, Panama. Great guy, by the way. But I was just commenting that if you can fight Sugar Ray Leonard in Madison Square Garden and you can get blasted with, what's the guy's name from Argentina? The Mano de Dios, the
Maradona.
Maradona. If you can get blasted with Maradona in the 80s and 90s on drugs and booze and travel the world, you can probably survive the coronavirus.
You can go toe-to-toe?
You can go toe-to-toe with the corona. So,
Roberto, as long as you're a world-class athlete, you're good.
Yeah, I mean,
is that what you're saying?
He's a world-class athlete that's like probably 65. And he's had some tough years.
Which means Pud is good then.
Yeah. But Roberto, if you're out there and you're listening, because I know you're a fan of the show, man.
Hola, señor.
I'm with you, buddy. I'm with you.
La leyenda.
But anyways, back to the topics tonight. This is Chuck Talk Free for All. We had Chuck Talk Sounds Chuck last week. Chucky, where were you last week?
Dag, yo. Where was I last week? I was on a yacht in the Mediterranean.
Of course you were.
So he says.
Yep.
You know, at least as far as you know. But I'm back in full effect.
Back in the saddle again.
Had to go see a man about a horse, but I'm back in the saddle.
There we go. So we're back in the saddle. And what did we want to talk about tonight? Have a little free for all.
Well, I was just floating a couple of things. So if you listen to our pod, those of you who are in the I think we're up to about 600 million listeners now. Last time I
think
checked,
you mean minus 500 million, 599 million.
Give or take. There's
Are
a
you counting Stevens listening to it?
standard deviation. I know Steve listens to it a lot, but yeah, the number of listens is up. Not that many IP addresses, but based on the number of listens, I'm gonna have to say
I'm getting
that,
people to chat me though. Honestly, saying they listen to the show.
Oh,
yeah, I know.
When I bought these stands, I talked to a guy about it. We had a nice little chat about your podcast. It was just he comes from a very conservative side, so it's fun to. He agrees with you on a lot of things. It was interesting.
Okay,
who is this guy? Let's give him a shout out.
Yeah.
Oh damn!
See, we don't even know our fans' names. That's great.
Bob, Jim, Steve, we appreciate you.
No, it's funny.
So,
I now release them and I don't tell people about it, and I get chats and texts about it.
Right on. That's awesome. Well, thanks for telling me. I really appreciate that.
Howard. His name was Howard. Thank you, Howard.
Thank you, Howard.
Howard.
Big fan of the show, Howard.
You the man, Howard. Power to Howard. Well, what I was trying to say is if you're one of the many Howards out there who listens to the show, you know that I am a big fan of the Jalen and Jacoby pod. And I remember Jalen from back in the day and the Fab Five, and I was listening to it on the ride out here tonight, and they were talking to Chuck D. And Chuck D is like a legend, He's from Public Enemy, hip hop, pioneer.
Who were the guys in Public Enemy?
It was Chuck D and Flavor
Flav and Ice Cube, or Ice T.
Ice T too.
Can you look that up for us?
Oh, yeah.
The members of.
There's a DJ who still works with them too. Anyways. They're actually even a little before our time, but I know Chuck D. And one of the main reasons, I know the Public Enemy hits, but one of the main reasons I know Chuck D. They were Fuck the Police,
okay,
yep.
Yeah.
And they were, and they were talking this
is like the 80s.
They were on tour in the early 80s.
Yeah, that's like Grandmaster Flash. They came right after that.
They came right after that, and
yeah.
they really brought stuff. And I'm not the guy to talk
I remember
about
freedom of speech,
hip hop history. Well, they did have some important legal stuff and. But they also
John McCain was really against them, I think.
All right,
there were some politicians who thought that they were really
too
controversial and negative.
We got Flavor Flav, Chuck D, Terminator X, DJ Lord, Sister Souljah, Kerry Wynn.
So the other group was NWA. The other group was NWA.
NWA was Dre, right?
Yeah, that was Dre, and that was Ice Cube, I think.
I think you're right.
But like you said, that was before we listened to rap.
That was really, I remember kind of we came online.
Easy, Ice Cube and Dr. Dre. Yeah.
The first hip hop that I had was
your pants like that. 80s.
The first hip hop that I had was like 87, 88, but I was like 4th or 5th grade. So it was like Jazzy Jeff and Fresh Prince.
Yeah, that's right.
He's
Parents
the
just don't understand.
He's the DJ, I'm the rapper.
Yeah.
Nightmare on my street. And so it was kind of, that was kind of like the cheesy, like chewing gum. I wasn't ready for like Public Enemy and shit yet. But my point was, I was listening to Chuck D, and he's made a name for himself also as like an organizer and an activist.
Good for him.
And like he's turning
Keep it up, Chuck
60
D.
this year. So, you know, he's an older guy in the
60,
hip hop
holy
game.
shit.
And he was talking about that, but one of the things that he was talking about
Wow.
that was really cool was they were going, yo, Chuck, like, what's the deal with this political landscape? Like, what do you think about this president? Like, what do you think about what's going on with George Floyd? They were just asking him all this current event stuff. And he was going, yo, one of the things I think about when I look at what's going on is we got Donald Trump 75, we got Joe Biden 78, we got Bernie Sanders 79. Why we
Who
got
just
these,
had like open heart surgery.
why do we have these septuagenarian, octogenarian motherfuckers running our country? Like, what is that doing for people? What's wrong with somebody who's 40, 50, 60? Why can't we get, and he's like, and you look in the streets and you see these teenagers and 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds and people with passion and energy, and there's a lot of power in that. Like, young people getting pumped and getting mobilized and getting out in the streets is making shit change. Like, that's what's moving shit forward. There's not a lot of 75 and 80-year-olds who are like moving the needle on like civil rights and police
but they're
brutality.
financing it.
Well, maybe, but his point
Not
was
maybe,
like
definitely.
financing the changes.
Yeah, financing the changes, like financing the political action committees and financing the groups.
But I'm talking about the people who are getting in the streets who are bringing attention.
The people
to
who
the-
work for the political action committee are younger generations. Totally agree.
No, I'm not talking about that. I'm just
Okay,
talking about
the
people who are
in the
just getting in the
streets,
street yelling and
the
screaming.
activists in the streets who are trying to move the needle, like you said.
Well, they are moving the needle.
Okay, the people in the, it doesn't matter. Like, we're not even arguing here. The people in the streets who are moving the needle are backed financially by some bigwigs.
No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like
I hear you.
protests.
Okay,
I'm talking about protests.
I-
So like,
yes.
if you're just a person who's 20 who doesn't like George Floyd getting killed, and you go out in the street and you join a march of 100,000 people,
Right.
and you make a big scene, and then the Raleigh, as they did a couple weeks ago, has a press conference and they say we're going to change our our police tactics, or we're going to redo our police protocols. So I think, I'm not saying that's 100% because of protests. I know what you're saying, like that there are action committees and organizations and things that require money, but my point is some of these things don't happen because of money. They just happen because a lot of young people with energy
It's a combination.
get out in the street.
It's definitely a
and
combination.
his point, Chuck D's point, was there's a lot of energy in that. And I was starting to say to Jeb, because we were talking about that, and we were like, we can't just tell people who are 75, like Joe Biden, move over, sit down, be quiet. Because first of all, he's not going to stand for that. Like, how would I feel? Jeb made the point. Well, you can make your point, Jeb.
Yeah.
Your sort of rebuttal about that.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with you, but my point to Chuck was that Chuck is about 40, and he's in charge of, like, our Etsy store. So I was curious, like, what if some 20-year-old fresh out of college, like, move over, Charles, you're too old. Let me run the Etsy store. I know what I'm
Right.
doing, and like,
Right.
how we should feel about it.
And I thought that was a good point, and I thought about that, and I thought about like Joe Biden or Donald Trump or our parents. My dad is 77.
But-
if I was just to go to my dad and be like, Dad, you don't know what you're talking about, sit down. But that's not what I'm saying.
Exactly.
I am saying Chuck D was making the point too. There needs to be made some space to listen to people who are 25 and 35 and 45 and 55, and that there's a real energy and a passion that
also-
comes from another
It's
generation.
also a wise thing to do if you are in the older generation that is, quote unquote, leading the charge. Like, we had a little management meeting at the company a few days ago, and we had a guy who's been at the company for a couple of weeks, and Jeb can attest to this. I asked him his opinion, and the reason why I asked him his opinion is because when you are involved in something as a human for such a long time, you can only see it a certain way.
Right.
And when you have a fresh set of eyes, you can learn from it. So hopefully the older generation, the Bidens and the Trumps, don't got too much hope for either one, but they're looking at it like, well, maybe we can see this in a different way. Maybe there is a different way to see how we manage and run society. And
You mean like an old white guy?
yeah,
Yeah, I'm,
No,
good.
no,
I'm
no,
looking
like-
forward to that because that's really been going well so far.
No. What I'm saying, what I'm saying is the old white guy asked the young black guy, like, "Hey, how can we do this better?" And
Sure.
and not just pay it lip service, but actually listen to the answer. And ironically, the guy that I asked, who'd been there for like 2 weeks, smart kid, he gave us some advice that we hadn't thought about, and it was enlightening.
Yeah.
And
Cool.
and so like. I've always said I'm not the smartest guy in the room, but I'm smart enough to surround myself with people who are smarter than me.
Right.
And I think that that's what, like, when you have a leader at a high level, you want them to not be the smartest guy in the room. You want them just to bring everyone in, listen to what's going on, and try to sort of figure out a plan. And what's going on is not just a bunch of other old 75, 80-year-olds. And I'd made this in one of the earlier podcasts. I don't know if you guys remember bringing it up. I was like, if a bunch of 40-year-old, if the average age in this, I think my quote was, and we'd have to go back and listen to the cast. If the average age in the Senate was 40 years old, I guarantee you we would have had a different coronavirus response. Guarantee it.
Yeah, well, you said, at least you said to me, and I don't remember if you said on the pod, but I like this line. It's not where you, what was your line about the table?
It's not where you stand, it's where you sit at the table.
Yeah, it's not where you stand, it's where you sit at the table. And that's kind of the point about having a 75, 78, 80-year-old president.
Exactly.
Is it's like, you can't help but be influenced, I would think, by the fact that you're going to live 10 or 15 more years.
Right, of course. You have to be.
And your
political
friends
donors
are all,
and your friends and your family and all that too.
Yeah, I think that, and I'm not saying that that's bad. And
No.
I think
It just is what it
I
is.
think it's important for me to say I don't want to come across as ageist. I don't want to be discriminatory against people. I'm not just saying, well, you're old, therefore you're worthless, and you don't have a
But
place
they
in
often
society.
discriminated against us because we're young.
Well, I do think that I just think we don't explore and give enough value to the differences between the generations.
Right, of course.
But in retrospect, we do. If you look at our parents' generation, the baby boomer generation, there's a clear distinction many times between them and their parents.
I just found a fact. Sorry,
Uh-oh.
I'm going to cut you off. I think
Go ahead.
It's super interesting. I looked up average age of senator.
I bet it's 70.
No, you're a little high.
63.
Senator, you're still a little high.
There's a few young ones in there.
The average age of the 115th, which I guess is the current one, is 61.8.
Okay.
The high-
61.8,
and like the
which is technically retirement age.
Yeah,
If
but
you
the
wanna-
most
if you take
interesting-
retirement
But that
early.
still probably means that 50% are over 61.
right. Well, I mean that's the average age, but like the newly elected senators are 54. Then the really interesting was for representatives, it's 57, and it's the highest like that's ever been. The newly elected representative is 50. Again, like 114 was.
But we've gotten a lot about we've talked a lot about just the innate bias that exists in society. You want to talk about innate bias? The closer you are to segregation, the closer you are to slavery, the closer you are to the innate bias. Like literally, Joe Biden, when he was born, was closer to the day the Civil War ended than he is to today's date.
Really?
Yeah, well, I mean, our parents,
Yeah, I think so. You
Our
do
parents
156 years
grew
ago?
up in segregation.
1865, 35. Yes, by 1 year, Joe Biden's birth date, he was closer to the end of the Civil War than he is to the date June 27th, 2020.
Now,
think about
Steve,
that.
now
I'm not
people-
calling him a racist. I'm not
Right.
calling him anything.
No, that is interesting.
Yeah.
I'm going to play devil's advocate, but then I'm going to oppose myself. Oppose my advocacy.
Oh,
I'm
whoa.
gonna devil the devil's advocate. You ready for this?
Oh,
Mind?
God. Here
Ready
we
for
go.
this?
Is that called an angel's advocate?
Ready for this mind screw? I think it's just called an advocate at
All
that
right.
point. Maybe. I don't know. At any rate,
Great movie, by the way.
So devil's advocate would say, well, okay, you're right, Steve. Joe Biden's old. He's 78, but he's smart and he's progressive and he's open-minded. And so even though he comes from that era, he can still like relate to like the 24-year-old black woman who's
Okay.
just eke by. Okay, maybe. But the reason that I was saying a minute ago about how we need to put a little more value and put a little bit more oomph on the difference between the generations like we do between baby boomer and World War II generation. Let's talk a little bit more about like my generation, the children of the baby boomers, and then let's talk a little bit more about like the next generation that's coming after me that's like coming out of college now. Was it generations every 15 years or so? So there's like a generation of people who is the generation behind us that are like in their 20s.
Right. Generation Millennials, yeah.
The millennials.
I'm a millennial, and I think there's like a X and a Y after me.
Right.
Yeah, there's like a range, but they started doing this weird thing where they would try to name generations every like 5 years. But really every 15 or 20 for my point. The point that I'm making is there's a cultural sort of majority and like kind of like an energy towards certain like, I don't know, whether it's music or whether it's like civil rights or whatever that can kind of like swell up in a generation that can be different from the generation that came before to the generation that came after it. And so I think that's where it becomes important. Like there's a difference between the way a 40-year-old sees America and the way a 65-year-old sees America, generally speaking. So that's where I am the devil's advocate to the devil's advocate, where I say, even though people would say, oh, Biden, he's progressive, whatever, he's still 78.
Right.
He's still of that generation. There are still certain things that are going to be ingrained in his subconscious, I think, that I'm suspicious of. And I don't want a president who's 80 fucking years old. I just don't want, like, that doesn't make any sense to me.
82 at the end of his first
That doesn't
term.
make any sense to me. I don't care who it is.
Right, I agree. But
be an advisor.
Okay, but
maybe be a cabinet member. Maybe. If you pass a physical.
I think that a majority of people who are listening would agree with this statement that government is stale and it often is beholden to generational values that are not the present majorities. I think that that's a statement that most people would feel comfortable saying. And I think that go-to solution that everyone says, which is never going to happen because how are these guys going to give up power, is term limits. Judges have term limits. Congressmen have term limits. The president does. But like that you're going to have term limits. So I think that there's two things that every listener out there, and I'm going to, as usual, I'm going to ask people to think outside the box, is problem one is that there's people in charge that don't have the majority's generational values. Because at 61, you're probably in probably the bottom 30% of the average of the age of the United States, meaning 66% of the people in the United States are younger than you. And probably the average median age in the United States is probably about 35 or 36. So you're 2 generations removed from the average thought pattern, which is probably about us, right? Like Charles, Jeb's maybe a little bit on the younger side. You and I, Charles, are probably a little bit on the older side of the average age in the United States. And it's like term limits. Well, guys, I hate to tell you, until we have another civil war, we're not getting term limits. Like there's no way it's like how many people in Congress ever vote against a pay raise? Like I think Rand Paul does, and that's it. You know, they're not going to vote against their self-interest because they all see themselves staying there for a long time. So I have a proposal, a Steverdamus proposal that said that I truly believe, and I've talked about this in previous podcasts, and that's sunset provisions. Every law expires in 20 years.
I like that.
And in 20 years, if we as a society deem that something should be illegal or something that should be legal or there's some behavior we should coax, whether that's sodas not bigger than 12 ounces or marijuana being legal or illegal or crack cocaine or whatever, we can make something a law today, but in 20 years that law expires, including murder, rape, whatever, so that the generations behind us are not beholden to our values because values change, and that's okay. That's okay.
I think it would make sense to make it 15 years because that's in keeping with what we're talking about. That's a generation.
I'm fine with that too.
Well, that's a generation.
Yeah,
technically, right?
I mean,
but I think you make a really good point.
That's
about
how the epidemiologists are defining generations. I knew they used to define them as 20, but I think you're right, Charles. I think it's sped up with technology.
Like from a population's I think like a census, or I don't remember who sets these rules, but I think like whoever decides like baby boomer, like if you go on, if you can Google this, I think like what defines a baby boomer, and it'll give you a range.
It's like
you have to be born between
44 to 67.
1944 and 1968 or whatever. It's like a 15-year range.
It's more. It's like 20, I think. But I think it's
Maybe
gotten
so.
smaller. You're right. I agree with you that it's getting smaller, and now that's technology advancing society so quickly.
Well, maybe, but I don't think it can get but so small, because I think the point is it's like you have to have lived a certain number of years and have had like a certain cultural experience.
Right.
And it has to have been different from the people who are 15 or 20 years older than you and 15 or 20 years younger than you. And that's why you are a generation in all the different ways that that's defined.
So yeah, a baby boomer is technically born between 1944 and
Nailed it.
1964.
I nailed it with 44 to 67 or whatever. Close enough.
Oh, yeah. I said 44 to 68. That's way too long, isn't it? So that's 20 years.
So Gen X is born 65 and 79.
Yeah, I'm the last of Gen X.
Okay, so we're technically Generation
Yeah.
X. All
But,
right.
but there's a
We're on the
weird
tail
there's a
end.
weird generational X in there.
That doesn't sound
They-
like 15 years. That sounds like more like 20 that they're working with.
Yeah.
Jeb?
Yeah, but I
Is more like a 20-year span.
I mean,
don't
we're
know where I
splitting
got
we're splitting
15.
hairs here. We're splitting hairs here, but I think that the new generation, how we define it, is now about every 15. Epidemiologists every 15. But it was for the longest time, 20 years.
Well-
So they said it was a 3-generational family. That's 60 years.
I want to talk about the generational thing, but I want to go back to the term thing for a second, because here's what I think is really interesting. You go up to two things based on what we were just talking about, and then I want to come back to the generation thing and we'll explore that more. Why does the president only get to do 4 or maybe 8?
Right.
The top dog, the guy who we determine is the most qualified to be the best. But then we let all these other clowns stay there for 20, 30, 40
The
years.
Supreme Court justices blow me away.
That
That's
doesn't
the
make
one
any
that blows
sense,
me
does
away.
it? I mean, some goofball like congressperson from some, no offense, but like, I don't know, some random state, some little, some senator from somewhere, like just, incumbent for 30 years. That doesn't make any sense at all. If you really believe in the system and you really want it to work the best that it can work, you have to believe that you have to always bring in new people with fresh ideas and
who have their pulse on the average American's belief and their average American's core value. Like the average American is probably about 35 years old. So you need to have the pulse on Doris and Genevieve and Raleigh and their education, which is our kids, by the way. And you also need to have the pulse on Stephen and Charles and Jeb, which are all business leaders. And you need to have a pulse, too, also on like our parents' generation. But you need to be able to understand it all. Like my parents' generation have no clue what's going on in my child's life. Not because they don't care, just because it is so foreign to who they are.
And I've heard people make the point, oh, well, you need people who are there for a long time, who really know how things work and know how to get things done.
Talk about being an ageist.
And I completely reject that premise.
Yes, I do.
I
too.
say you need people who are new, who have new ways of thinking, who are going to shake things up, because you know what? The way we've been doing things forever suck. Our planet's getting destroyed. Like, look at our country. Like, our wealth disparity is getting worse. Like, our agricultural system and our lobbying on the government is ridiculous.
Charles.
Are we debating tonight, not having a conversation? This is kind of fun. Go ahead.
And I agree. I
You
thought-
said but.
ass. Anyway, I agree with you completely. Fresh eyes is great, but that's exactly what Donald Trump is. He's not a career politician. He's fresh eyes.
I know, but here's two things. One, if you had a whole bunch of people who were coming from different angles and who were coming from different approaches and stuff, I think you'd be less likely to have just these kind of like herd of Republicans that's following Trump and this other herd of people like Pelosi who have been up there forever who are just kind of like status quo. And so there might be a more effective like resistance to some kind of clown like him. But also, I'm not saying that just because somebody's an outsider that they're going to be great. I'm just saying that we've tried having all these people up there for 20, 30, 40 years, and like we're just
Have
kind
you
of like
seen
in a
this?
rut in a lot of ways. Even though Trump, I would say, is kind of like an outlier, he's also a product of what I see wrong with the system. Like I see him as just kind of like a dude on the take. I see all these lobbyists.
He's in it for him.
I mean, I see all these lobbyists and big agriculture and big pharma, and I see, all this money, and I think he just basically kind of goes in back rooms, and it's like, Trump do this, Trump do that, and you're going to get paid, and, Mar-a-Lago's going to get bankrolled, and he don't give a shit. He's just he's just a narcissist who's, promoting his brand. But that doesn't mean that every single person who's fresh blood, bringing in people who are young and excited. I mean, I'm not talking about a bunch of Donald Trumps.
But like,
I see your point, but
I shared this photo with you guys we have a podcast chat group, and it said, think about this. When this photo was taken in 1987, and it's a picture of Donald Trump shaking Ronald Reagan's hand, it said, both Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi were members of Congress blaming Reagan for all our problems. Right. 32 years later, both are still in Congress, except now they're blaming Trump for all our problems.
Yeah, so that means Trump and Reagan may have sucked, and you motherfuckers have been there the whole time, too.
And
what the fuck have you done about it?
Exactly.
So that's kind of my point, is it's just like, throw the baby out with the bathwater, because the bathwater smells like baby shit. That's my point.
And the baby shitting everywhere.
That should be a T-shirt. You wanna print that?
Throw the baby out with the bathwater.
I just did.
Yeah,
Nice.
exactly.
Because I'm wearing them, and I just did.
All right.
But I mean, I think that's what sort of like, to Jeb's point, though, that's sort of like what Donald Trump was. He was draining the swamp,
But everybody says that, right? When they're new, they're like, oh, I'm here and I'm new and I'm energy.
It's time to change Washington.
Because the message that I'm suggesting is not a new message. It's not a new idea that some outsider is going to come in and but
you don't change Washington. Washington changes you.
People don't actually do it. The reason people don't actually do it is because there's such an establishment there already. And when people make the argument,
it's Machiavellian, man.
when people make the argument, you got to know how things work. What I hear is there's already a whole bunch of people who have been there 20 or 30 years. And if you go in there with a bunch of idealism and you want to shake and bake, there's going to be like, nah, man, sit down, be quiet. Farmer runs that corner. Agriculture runs that corner. These guys need their kickback.
You're already seeing
sit down and be quiet.
You're already seeing it with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She's already beginning to quiet her mouth down. She's already beginning to go out to the fancy dinners. She's already beginning to enjoy her, apartment and
enjoy her $175,000 salary and her sweet health plan.
And she's focused on getting reelected. She's not focused on making change. She's focused on getting reelected. So it's like, and that would be like what I would consider an outsider or someone who won under the same blanket as the conversation as Donald Trump, which is like, I'm going to go to Washington and drain the swamp. Like, we're going to fight the establishment. But now they quickly become the establishment. And I think that's the and I think as long as you don't have term limits, which I agree, I think term limits are a great solution, but I just also don't think it's a realistic one. Which it's very rare that Steven says things where he admits defeat to anything that's challenging authority.
No, don't do it.
Yeah, don't do it, Steven. Don't give up. But I guess I'm trying to look at I want to win the war of term limits, meaning I want term limits to exist. But I think you have to get there in steps. And I think the first step is the sunset provision, at least on certain things like criminal justice.
We have to change the narrative about how we think about government. We look at government and we think it's okay that Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and all these clowns have been up there for 20, 30, 40 years, and I think about this thing that I read, and I'm pretty sure it was Abraham Lincoln who said something about how he thought that being the president, he was a lawyer, right, in Ohio. And he thought Illinois, and he thought that what you should do is, and I'm pretty sure John Adams said something similar, and I'm actually pretty sure John McCain also said something similar, and different politicians have said this, but I think Lincoln said something one time in one of his speeches or one of his letters about how what you should do, the ideal is it's a civil service. So you should have a job, you should have an occupation. He was a lawyer, or you run a factory, or you're a teacher or whatever, and then you pause that and you go to Washington and you do your duty, your civil service, and it's 4 years or it's 6 years, and it shouldn't necessarily be glamorous. It shouldn't necessarily enhance your stock portfolio. It shouldn't necessarily be hundreds of thousands of dollars in your pocket, and you sure as shit shouldn't be spending your time thinking about getting reelected to do it again. You should be there to do your civil service duty, do it well based on what you believe on. Think about your constituents and where you came from, and then go the fuck back home and go back to work.
And I think
that's what it should be.
Some people
and
still
that's
do that.
how we should view it.
Right.
And you don't get to stay. You don't get to stay. You can come for 4 years, maybe 6, and then go the fuck back home. We don't want you there for so long.
But I agree.
And I that's what if we could
Chucky
do
is
that,
charged tonight.
I really think that would work better.
He was worried about the neighbors hearing us. By the way, we're sitting on the.
I really think that could work better.
and Charles is making sure the neighbors know that we think.
And
that
we have a neighbor who has told me that they think that's a good idea for people to be in government for 30, 40, 50 years. And
it's a
until
terrible
they
idea.
Fucking, Supreme Court justices fucking die on the bench.
Well, I mean, that's exactly what happens in the United States, right? Like, what's the average age of the Supreme Court justice? Give me that factoid.
74.
I'm guessing older than that. Oh no, John Roberts and Gorsuch are pretty young. They're probably in their 60s. It's probably
Which
74
also
is-
makes no sense
it's
why
very
presidents can put people up there when they're 40 and they're there for 40 years.
Well, look at John Roberts. Like
Makes no sense.
John Roberts came to power under George Bush. I mean, John Roberts he's a healthy dude. He's probably going to be the Supreme Court justice when I'm dead.
Can
So
you
he's going to be the
help me
Supreme
out
Court
with a
justice
little-
my entire life.
Now back to the show.
But yeah, so
All right, we got
I said 74.
72.
Oh!
I'm just gonna read. This is not the average. I'm just gonna
Okay.
read all the
Steve's
ages.
going to do the math.
Quickly.
72, 87, 81, 65, 70, 66, 60, 52, and 55.
it's like 70. His average age 71.
Yeah, 70 about ish.
Damn.
A little bit lower.
87.
Again,
though.
I'm not
That's
an
is that
ageist.
That's Ruth Bader
That's
Ginsburg.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not an ageist, but I would ask every American, and that means everyone over 18. So I would ask every 20-year-old, 30-year-old, 40-year-old, 50-year-old, I would ask everyone this question. Do you think that the average 70-year-old or 80-year-old
understands how you see the world.
will have the most progressive, forward-moving, culturally aware agenda when making decisions?
Simplify the question.
Do you think that?
I think that's a great Chucky.
You know what I'm saying?
Chucky, I think that's a great question.
Think about civil rights. Think about race.
But let's simplify it. Do you think the average
Keep it simple for the millennials.
Okay. Do you think the average 70-year-old in the United States understands how you see the world? That's just the question that you just asked. You asked it a little bit more poignantly and a little bit more prophetically, and you're trying to tease out some arguments. But I'm just asking the basic question.
Well, the reason that
if you walk down the street and you see a 70-year-old in front of you, do you think you see the society the same way?
Well, the reason I was being nuanced is because the answer to that question is nuanced because in some ways, yes. Like my dad is 77, and in a lot of ways, we do see the world similarly, and we do see things eye to eye.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
I agree
So
with that.
I'm not going to say like a 70-year-old doesn't. I was just saying overall is a 70-year-old on average the person who's making the most progressive, and I like the term
No, the
progressive.
answer is no.
And also too,
Because you just
I have a that the 70-year-old in Supreme Court was nominated by George H.W. Bush. So that was what 5 presidents ago,
4
4
presidents.
5 terms ago.
5 terms ago. George H.W. Bush.
Yeah, that was.
Well, he
That
did
was
too.
88 to 92.
Yeah, but like
He did 2 before Clinton did 2 before Obama did 2.
I think Obama got 1.
Obama got.
I mean Clinton, and then we had W.
But anyway, my point
What'd you
was
say? No,
the-
Clinton did 2.
Clinton has 2. George W. has 2. Barack has 2. Trump has 2.
W had 2.
W has 2.
Good lord.
But my point was age is a thing too.
That's
but the
embarrassing.
guy, Clarence Thomas, was nominated by H.W. That was like 30 years ago. We've changed a lot since then. Like if you came in under H.W., like that's things have changed.
It's not just coming in. It's also
That's a good point, Jeb.
it's a great point, but it's not just coming in. Like I agree with that, but it's also just how you grew up.
Well,
you know?
yeah, that's why I say average, because I think there are above average 70 and 80-year-olds, and that's why I said
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
people will make the argument that Joe Biden's 78, but he's got the youthful energy and pizzazz and progressivism of a 25-year-old. That's what Biden supporters will tell you. And maybe, I still don't want a 78-year-old president.
But I'm going to have to call bullshit. Like, earlier you said something, and I want to make this very clear to the listeners. Like, Charles said something, I don't want to be an ageist. I don't want to... say that a 70 or 80 or 90-year-old is not capable. But oftentimes when I see a 70, 80 or 90-year-old, they tell me, oh, you just don't understand. You're not mature enough. You haven't been around long enough. So talking about ageism,
right.
like that's exactly the definition of it being an ageist. It's saying, hey, Steverdamus, you're 40 years old. You're a little wet behind the ears. You can't make this happen. You don't understand.
There's a famous quote that is attributed to Winston Churchill, but I remember looking it up one time, and he didn't actually say it first. It's also like other people who have said it, and it was in a play and something. But the basic sort of paraphrase of it is, any man who's under 30 who's not a liberal is has no heart.
Yeah.
And any man who's over 40 is not a conservative, has no mind. But I think the gist of that is what I was sort of getting into with Jeb earlier. When you're young, you kind of have all this passion and all this energy, and you maybe have a little bit more of like a carefree, like joie de vivre, and you have, maybe less responsibility, less weight of the world on your shoulders, whatever. There's value in that. Like what you're saying, Steve, don't just shit on someone because they're positive and they're passionate and they're, not liberal in the sense of necessarily like political party, but just like peace and love and caring about people. And, like that's not a bad energy to have in the world. It's only part of the puzzle. But, if you're young and all you're thinking about is like, economy and efficiency, then that's sort of too bad, right? Because you're sort of missing out on just like, peace and, freely just sort of appreciating people. Now, I think the other side of that is people say, well, you get to be 40, 45, 50, 60, you got bills to pay, you're trying to run a company, you're trying to, solidify a career, you got kids to support, blah, 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 you got a mortgage. You need to think about economy and efficiency. And so maybe you start to think a little bit more about like not wanting to pay taxes and not wanting to whatever it is. The point is like both have their validity, both have like their sort of like leg to stand on, but you can't just be a 50-year-old, 60-year-old, 70-year-old and just be like, well, I understand the reality of life. So you're just some 25-year-old who just wants peace and love because you don't know what you're talking about. I say that's bullshit. I say your 25-year view is legitimate. I say your 75-year view is legitimate. But I say if every fucking leader is 75, then there's no legitimacy being given to the younger, sort of alternate view.
I mean, it makes perfect sense to me. It really does.
Okay.
So
there we have it.
Problem solved. I mean, you can't argue with it. But just as we've said a lot on the show, two things can be true at once.
Two things can be true at once. And it is interesting, right? I mean, I feel like when Barack Obama came into office, he was pretty young.
He was 46 or 44, I think.
Which is pretty young for a president.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like Kennedy, right? It was like a wave of sort of like youth and energy.
Well, I mean, his slogan was "Hope is on the way," right? Like he basically sold the concept. It was great marketing. He took advantage of Facebook and social media, but he sold the concept that like your hero on the white horse is coming around the bend and everything's going to be fucking, cupcakes and rainbows here in a second. And of course it wasn't. And he gets there and he expands wars and he expands the military industrial complex and he doesn't attack climate change and he makes, healthcare his central piece of legislation, which I get. I get it, but like I don't know. I think Listen, I voted for Obama in 2008. I didn't vote for him in 2012.
Well, and it's a little bit of the sort of like liberal Democrat fallacy that Obama could do no wrong.
Yeah, but
And I think it does need to be pointed out that, in fact, under the Obama administration, like we really did some major like military.
And I think Obama would admit that. I really do. And I think Obama would also, like, if you got him in a closed room and gave him, a glass of bourbon and a doobie, he would probably tell you, like, you guys just don't understand how powerful Washington, D.C. really is. And I think he'd be like, I mean, I don't know. Like, I think he would. It's like I said, it's not a conspiracy, but I think that, like, it's very clear. You give X number of dollars to the military, or shit's going to go bad for you. Whether shit's going to go bad for you means you're going to die, or shit's going to go bad for you, we're going to embarrass you, or shit's going to go bad for you, you're going to lose the election.
Right.
Like, it's like you don't shrink the military. You don't shrink the prison system. Like, it's too powerful. And he might have had that idea, and like Joe Biden, like talking about age, pulled him into the Oval Office and said, "Hey, listen here, man. Like, we don't do that around here." And so he could have come in there all Chicago and happy and to Donald Trump's.
Donald Trump may have done the same thing.
Or Donald
Who
Trump.
knows?
I
I suspect he's a little lazy for that, but
or Donald Trump came in there and said, "I don't give a fuck what anyone says," which I do think is kind of how he is because he's demented, but that's a different reason. But they always say you don't change Washington, Washington changes you. Right. And it's the old adage that a libertarian like myself says is like, you don't give power to the individual, you give it to the office.
yeah.
And
Right.
you
And
know,
then you're happy when it's somebody like Obama because you think they're doing the right thing, even though you don't necessarily know what's really going down. Or if somebody like Obama rolls out a health program and you think it sounds great, but then it gets all chopped up and changed in Congress, you say, well, it wasn't his fault. He couldn't control Congress. And so you still feel like it's a great thing that Obama has all this power and can do these executive orders and stuff. And then Trump gets in office and has the same amount of power.
And you're like,
going,
whoa,
wait a minute, whoa, wait a
that's
minute.
unconstitutional.
This guy, well, he's a fucking asshole. It's like, well, it's the same office that we invested and imbued with all this power. And what did you think was going to happen? There was always going to be somebody in there that you loved?
Yeah. Well, it brings me to a point tonight. So I got to give a shout out to one of my favorite listeners, Heidi. And she's like,
yeah, Heidi, what up?
she's like, I really want to hear you talk. You said in your last podcast, the last Chuck Talk, that to you, the most important thing is planet Earth, but I don't hear you talking about it very much on your show. And I think there's a perfect segue here because to all of these people out there that...
What kind of segue?
A silky smooth, sexy segue.
There we go, Heidi. Silky smooth, sexy segue. Is, I think, the biggest... Like, yes, he expanded wars. Yes, he made some bad decisions. No, he didn't shrink the police departments. No, he didn't. Obama had a lot of opportunities that he missed, and I think he would admit that. And proud on you, Obama. But I think the biggest opportunity he missed was he didn't put the planet first. He spent all his political capital not on fighting climate change. He spent all his political capital on healthcare. And political capital, for those who don't understand it, is when you get there, you only have so many favors you can ask. You can only go to the well so many times. And he really wanted to carry the torch of healthcare, which is noble. Listen, I'm empathetic with the idea. I don't think it works at a 350 million person level. I think it works at like a state and local level. So listen, if Massachusetts wants to have, Mass Care or Romney Care, or Utah wants to have theirs, go for it. Like, do your thing, baby boo. But I think that's, to me, when history judges Obama, his biggest failure was he did not put planet Earth first. He definitely tried to do some things, especially towards the end of his second term. But
it was like a side. It wasn't the main entree.
Yeah, it was not the main. Healthcare was the main entree. And
Obamacare. That's what people remember.
Obamacare, which, like I said, I understand the concept. I understand the idea. I applaud the nobilism. I just think in the functionality of 350 million people across 7 time zones, it's not going to work.
Well, and the sad truth about that, too, is it's like you're trying to force a socialist idea, which is essentially what the Obamacare type deal is,
100%. That's what
and not to say that in a lot of ways America is a socialist country.
Yes, in a lot of ways
it's a hybrid of socialism and capitalism. And
anytime you pay $1 to a government and that government gives you any sort of service, it's some form of socialism.
sure, socialism means the government owns a means of production.
Or government
So-
or government provides a service.
Or government provides it, right? So when the state builds a road, that's socialism.
Yes, that's correct.
But we also obviously have a thriving capitalist market. And I do think that the markets probably could be arranged a little bit differently. And I think that some of the things that
But it's not government's job to do it.
Not necessarily. I think it's, maybe government has a role. Maybe it's more of a local role. Maybe it's more of a minimal role.
There you
I
go,
don't
Chuck.
think-
You're talking about the levels of government. I like that.
I don't think federal government needs to have a major role in deciding how we arrange markets.
We got another converter.
But I think,
Cheers.
well, I'm an independent, but I do view things independently, and so I'm not a Democrat, I'm not a Republican, but I definitely think that capitalism can do a lot to help the environment if the markets are arranged the right way.
Yeah.
And I think that's the real
yes.
opportunity that was missed. Instead of trying
Yes.
to jam
Yes.
a socialist healthcare system schematic down our throats, you could have been grooming an American capitalistic market system to go green. And there's a lot of ways that government could support that. Stop subsidizing fossil fuels.
Oh my God! Yes, amen.
Stop subsidizing fossil fuels.
Amen.
Stop subsidizing an agricultural system that is responsible for 1/3 of carbon emissions worldwide. You know
Amen.
that? The American agricultural system
Amen.
destroys the shit out of the planet every year like it's their job, which it is, and they are subsidized by our tax dollars. There are so many things that our government could stop doing and start doing. Obama missed the boat on that. Trump doesn't care. Whoever comes next, that has to
Biden
be.
doesn't care. And Lord, no, like we all know Trump doesn't care. And if Biden says he cares, he pays it lip service. Like this is the whole thing too. Like we were talking about earlier in previous podcasts about you're talking about agro. Like big agro is terrible for our own human bodies, and it's also terrible for the environment. Water usage, energy usage, land usage,
Petroleum
toxins, petroleum usage.
What it does to the soil,
soil-
the topsoil is just getting
Oh,
ravaged.
dude, it's just. I mean,
If you want to know about it, check out Dr. Mark Hyman. Check out his book Food Fix. Check out some of his podcasts, Hyman, Hyman. This dude has done the research. He's brilliant and he's amazing. And he'll explain the whole thing about how much lobbying in big agriculture has just wrecked how we eat, how we grow shit. It's fucking terrible.
Oh, it's
Not all of us. I'm just saying a lot of what goes on.
Steverdamus will say it a lot more succinctly and a lot, I guess, in a way in which the average listener is going to really understand. I do encourage you to go listen to Hyman, but I'm going to make it very clear. Big Agra are fucking assholes. Like, they're terrible people. Like, they literally and this is where people are like, oh, well, don't you understand? That's capitalism at work. I'm like, no, it's not. They go into Washington and get massive amount of socialist subsidies. If it were capitalism at work, we wouldn't be growing this much corn. We wouldn't be growing this much of anything. If we weren't subsidizing all this shit, we would probably be eating a lot more at home and in local farmers markets because it's too expensive because all this shit that's like flown in and it's all subsidized
And the farmers
by the government,
don't
not
even
by the
really
market.
benefit anymore.
Oh, no,
from
no.
the things that were intended to really.
It's so
support the
inefficient. It's all
farmers.
lost into the system. All this stuff is lost into the system. Like there's just all this money being siphoned off and sucked off.
So I think that's really you wanted to talk about environment for Heidi.
Yes, and that's what,
one.
yeah,
for sure.
Big Agri is one. You obviously have the problem with climate change. You obviously have the problem with burning carbon emissions. You have the problem with the biggest fossil fuels. You have the problem with water management. You have the problem with land management. You have the problem with overpopulation. There's several issues at play. And I swear, guys, like to anyone out there listening, I am an environmentalist. I love the environment. I studied ecology in college. I've marched in the parades. I've participated. I've made changes. I've gone vegan before. I've I've ridden a bike. I've done all the types of things that me as an individual practices what I preach. And I'm at 40 and hey, maybe I don't know. Maybe I'm not old enough to know yet. Like maybe Biden knows better than me. But the best way to fix this problem is pure capitalism. I truly believe that. It's pure capitalism and informational capitalism, meaning that every time the reason why capitalism works so well is it's so fast. So like if we, the consumer, go and demand vegan food, that's what we're going to get. If we, the consumer, go demand, companies behaving themselves, that's what we're going to get. You don't need government regulation. We don't need to have this false sense of security that government's regulating our food supplies, telling us that Cheetos are edible. Cheetos aren't edible. Cheetos are toxins.
Here's a really interesting way to think about it that you sort of helped me understand. And then I started working in a, capitalist job and getting more of an insight into it as well. If you're running a business, you need to sell things today.
Right.
And so you need money coming in. And if the thing that you're trying to sell isn't environmentally friendly or isn't demanded because it isn't grown sustainably or it isn't, whatever, then you have to change it. Like right now. Like you can't wait because you need to sell it today.
Right.
So you need to listen. You need to have your ear to the ground. You need to know what's going on, because if people are demanding, like you're saying, Steve, I'm just sort of echoing your point. If people are demanding oat milk, you better start making oat milk.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
if there's still a demand for cow milk, then you can have your cows and you can put cow milk. But I'm just saying, like, if there's a demand, you have to meet it or you go out of business and you don't get paid.
And someone else
If
goes and
you're
meets
in-
it.
But if you're working for the government and you're being told that you need to regulate to try to change something, you're still getting paid.
Or
You're
you're
still getting
subsidized
paid
by the
today.
government.
I'm saying if you're the government regulator,
Oh, yeah.
you're still getting paid today.
That too.
You're still getting paid tomorrow. There's not the same sense of urgency. At some point, you might get around to actually making sure that your regulation is going to work or not going to work. But if it doesn't work, you're still getting paid. So this is my point, is just kind of like why, of your point, why does capitalism work quickly and government tend to work slowly? Because you got to wait for the tax dollars that got appropriated to fund some initiative to not get appropriated again in 2 years or 4
then
years or
get
6
reappropriated.
years, and then see if the shit worked or not. Whereas like if you're a company, it's just like, well, that didn't work last week, we're not doing that this week.
Like, let me give
Kind
you
of thing.
let me
You know,
give you-
you can just make quick decisions.
Let me give you two really, really, really obvious answers. So basically, some of the biggest contributors to climate change are fossil fuels burned for home electricity and power plant electricity, basically coal. And then the other one is vehicle. It's basically combustion engines.
Wake up.
Well, people are like, well, we should have solar cars, or we should have electric cars, or we should have built more efficient, societies where we all live in skyscrapers and we all, like major cities where we don't have to consume as much power. And I agree with all those things. And so you have to ask yourself, well, why didn't we? Well, we didn't because oil is really cheap. Well, why is oil really cheap? It's really cheap because there's a lot of it, and the United States military protects the shipping lanes of it. So the United States military is all over the world in the Suez Canal, in the Panama Canal, in the Strait of Hormuz, protecting shipping lanes so that oil can move around about the world freely.
Yep.
As soon as there's tension in the Gulf, oil prices double. The reason why is there may not be a supply, or the supply would be cut down. And so you now have a economy that's like, hey, this is really cheap. We might as well use this as an energy source. Where if we were to be like, well, we couldn't survive with $5 gallons of gas, or we couldn't survive with it costing $1,000 to heat your home if you had like a small home. Oh yeah, we could. We would just adapt. We would make changes, and we would adapt.
We would demand things that were more efficient, homes that were more efficient.
Exactly.
I remember, Steve,
or a cheaper source of energy,
I remember when I
like
lived
the sun.
I remember when I lived in Spain in 2001. When I lived in Spain in 2001, one of the things that was really interesting was the cost for certain things was like 4 or 5 or 6 times more in southern Spain in 2001 than it was in the U.S.
Like electricity.
Things like electricity, telephone, gasoline. And so like people didn't really drive, they walked. Like in the cities, everybody walked. Like, I mean, I was like a mile and a half from school. Like it wasn't even a question. Like I was definitely walking. Like you were definitely walking in Sevilla if it was less than 2 miles. Like there was no way someone was spending gas on that. Well, guess what? That's better for you. It doesn't take that much longer. It's not that hard to do. Granted, you're in an urban place. You know what else? We weren't allowed to use the phone. There was a house phone, but the shit was expensive. And so you just didn't use the phone. And you know what? We just adapted. We didn't use the phone. We didn't need to use the phone. We just walked outside and talked to people, or we all got these cheap little cell phones. That was actually when I learned to text. 2001. You probably remember this, Steve.
Oh yeah, dude, tequila.
Yes.
More importantly,
you had to get those little burner
Priorities.
phones.
Yeah, burner phones. Yeah,
I think maybe
that's back when we were running drugs.
maybe I had a cell phone in 2001. I don't remember, probably, but you had to get those little like Jeeper like
burner phones.
yeah.
They had the game Snake on them. I just remember playing
They
Snake.
did, or Worm or whatever.
Yeah, Snake. It was Snake.
But it was expensive to call people on those, and you had to buy minutes. But it was cheap to text people,
Right. It was like- yeah,
so
like a
you could
nickel.
just text
It was
people.
pesetas back then.
It was pesetas.
People who don't know, Charles and I actually lived in Spain at the same time. I lived in a different town.
You lived in Ronda,
but we partied
in
a
rural
bunch.
southern Spain. I lived
Ugh.
in Sevilla.
Those memories.
About an
oh
hour
my
away.
God.
That was a lot of fun, man. Southern Spain in 2001 was a jam. And that was not an expensive place to live. But my point is that, it wasn't that hard to adapt to using less energy, turning the lights out. But
also look
not
at what's
having the air
happened.
conditioning running.
Right, that's a big one. The temperature of a home or a car. But also look at what's happened is Spain has decided that they wanted to have an environment that is cool in their home. Well, they can't afford state-run electricity because it's poorly run. So the free market goes out and develops solar technology, geothermal, and you're seeing a country who probably in 2000 had, 1% solar to now 10 to 15% solar would be a complete guess here. And so you're seeing the market respond. So we're not just going to adapt. We're going to, if we desire a change, we'll find a cheaper way to do it. And that's my point. And my argument is like, guys, I am an environmentalist. I really, really am. And most of my friends, and I'm not picking on my girl Heidi out there, but like most of my friends think that government is the solution to our environmental problems. And I'm just saying, is it really? Is it really? Like if we look at our, and I think that they there is a point that's kind of hard to dispute, which is like, well, people will do anything for $1 and $1, and they'll just, piss their chemicals into a river and kill all the frogs and kill all the humans, and they don't care because they're just trying to make money. I think that that's a way to see it, and I think that's possible, but I don't think it's as possible now with all the social media and all the information of news out there. And so...
And businesses really don't want to get called out and caught for that stuff.
Exactly.
But I mean, that's not to say that there shouldn't be no oversight.
Hey, I'm not saying
there is a role,
especially
locally.
Exactly. Like, I believe in a strong EPA for a county, city, state government. I don't know how well an EPA is going to do it at a federal government. Like, does a guy in Washington, D.C. who's from Boston that studied land management really understand Eastern North Carolina agriculture? Probably not. But like, do people in Eastern North Carolina understand it? Yeah. So maybe let Eastern North Carolina people make law about Eastern North Carolina and let the Boston dude just go back to, fucking Harvard and think he's smart. Like, I don't give a shit. So it's challenging and it's perplexing. But what I do know is we have tried to protect the environment through government, and it's worked, but it hasn't worked well. So what if we were to try a different system? But we have to go wholeheartedly into we have to stop government subsidies. Government subsidies, that form of socialism, is toxic to fixing the environment. Well, and that's my point.
And it's really related to what we've been talking about people wanting to get reelected.
Yeah,
and
of
lobby.
course.
Because if you want to get reelected, you need big lobby and big money because you need campaign money, which means you need to go out and, encourage things that may or may not be good for the environment if they're good for somebody's pocketbook. But also, it makes me think about how, and Chuck D kept calling the presidential election, he kept calling it the pageant, the beauty pageant. He kept calling federal government and the presidential election the big beauty pageant show. Because it's really what it is, right? You go out and you have this big stage and all of this, balloons and, pop celebrities and like all of this shit and make a big show. And the reason you're trying to do this, you're trying to be appealing, right? You're trying to make people happy. You're trying to tell them what they want to hear. Hope is on the way. Make America great again. What you're not trying to do is say, hey guys, we need to save the environment. And some of the things that we do that really make us feel comfortable that we're totally used to aren't that great for the environment. So we might have to be like a little bit uncomfortable for a little while, or like be a little bit adaptable, or like change it up a little bit, or maybe like turn down the air, or like pay for solar panels right now so we can save money down the road, or just like, start buying some different products. People don't want to hear that. You're not going to get elected doing that. You can't get reelected going, yo guys, this is going to be like a little bit uncomfortable and a little challenging, a little tough, but we're just going to have to. No, politicians want to tell you what you want to hear. And so if you just have to keep going out there and telling people what they want to hear all the time, you're never going to fucking enact the kind of change that a capitalist market could enact if it was like people demanding it and the market answering without somebody having to go out there and tell them what they want to hear. Do you know what I'm saying? Like that to me seems like the key difference.
I mean, I totally get it. Like I've often contemplated the concept of running for political office. And I look at my platform
and being like, yo, y'all motherfuckers need to get tough. And be like, wait, we ain't voting for you.
Yeah, exactly. Like, hey, guys, we're fat as fuck. We're out of shape. The coronavirus should not
You guys suck.
The coronavirus should not be dangerous to us. We should all be in a lot better shape. By the way, we're going to make energy twice as expensive. Here's another thing.
Why are you even here? You should be doing push-ups right now and saving the environment, motherfuckers. Get out of my rally.
Like, who's voting
for me? Go home.
Who's voting for me if I say that?
Don't give me money.
All right, okay.
Do not give me money. Stop giving me money.
Yeah, exactly.
Just reverse psychology.
We're gonna go to Washington and shrink it. I'm not getting elected saying that, but like people are like, here's another thing too. I was like, if I doubled the cost of electricity, everyone would still pay the same electric bill. They would just use half as much.
Yeah. That was the point with Spain. That was the point I was trying to make about Spain. People didn't pay 4 or 5 times as much. It cost 4 or 5 times as much. They just used less.
Exactly.
And that's how but what people want politicians to tell them is you can use all you want because I made it cheap for you.
Yep. That's exactly right.
You can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't march out the military to protect all of the fucking oil that we're parading out of the Middle East so that the oil can be cheap and then turn around and be like, also y'all got to use less.
Yeah, it doesn't work that way.
If you want us to use less, then pull the military out of there. Let the gas go to $20 a gallon, and people will use less. But that will be political suicide, and you won't get reelected. And you can't let gas go to $20 a gallon on your watch, so you'll never do that.
Exactly. Like here's the honest to goodness truth. If right now the average gallon of gas in North Carolina is $2, and the average car in North Carolina, I'm guessing here, gets 15 miles to the gallon. If gas went to $6 a gallon, the average car would go to 45 miles per gallon. So like Charles is saying, no one would actually pay more at the pump. They would drive a smaller car. They would pay the same amount. They would just get more efficiency.
Yeah.
And it's just like, man.
Well, I mean, that happened in the 80s in America.
Oh, yeah, the CAFE standards. That was
I'm just saying everybody was driving giant gas guzzlers in the 70s that got like $10 to the gallon. And then Japan and some of these places started being like,
the Honda Accord, the Toyota Camry.
And Ford, they were like, we got these little cars that'll get a lot better gas mileage. And, that hit people in their wallet. They were like, all right, cool. Why am I driving a freaking Ford Fairlane when I can drive like a Honda Accord or whatever? But,
I put the down payment on the Tesla truck. It's $100. I don't know if I'm actually gonna have to buy it. It's 2021. I don't know if I'm gonna have 60 grand sitting around, but the Tesla pickup truck is coming out. I think it's fall of 2021 allegedly.
Oh, that'd be dope. I would love me a
But
Tesla
you can buy one for $100. Like, but this is what I'm saying too. Is like my dad, who's a huge environmentalist, was looking for a new car. I was like, Dad, go buy a Tesla. Like, send a signal to the market that that Ford and GM needs to focus on renewable energy whips. You know, like rides for all you old people who don't understand what a whip is.
REW.
Yeah. But the
Renewable energy whips.
so
You're not familiar with REW?
yeah.
No, I haven't heard of
A
it.
Tesla's a
That's because I
yeah.
just made it up.
Oh, snap.
but the point is, and this is like, so for Heidi out there, I'm talking about the environment. It is the most important thing. It's more important than white supremacy. It's more important than Black Lives Matter. It's more important than the coronavirus. We have to take care of planet Earth, not just for our generation, not just for our kids' generation, but for the people who are not even here yet.
Human lives matter.
Yeah.
Oh, no, don't start this.
World matters. How about just the world matters? And
Lives.
Just world, just the environment matters. And like I said, multiple things can be true at once. I'm not downgrading anyone's political movement. My mask that I wear into the store in South Raleigh, which gets a lot of weird looks, is a Black Lives Matter mask. I definitely get stared at a little bit at being a tattooed, mohawked white man wearing a Black Lives Matter into anywhere in South Raleigh where most people are wearing MAGA hats. You kind of get stared at, but I'm also strong and 240 pounds, so I don't get stared at too long. But anyways, so yes, all lives matter, all Black lives matter, all political movements matter, everything matters, but something that matters just a little bit more is the environment. And
Well, absolutely, because if lives are going to matter, they have to have somewhere to exist.
exactly.
We have to have a planet that's clean. We have to have water that's clean and air that's clean and soil
But it also-
that is renewable.
But this is also why I also say that the most important thing, and if it was my political platform, I would talk about how we treat ourselves as individuals, because we have to fix that. Like, the reason we're in this coronavirus nightmare is because we're fucking fat as fuck and out of shape, and we have terrible dietary, sleep, and exercise habits. And so if we focused on that and we started caring more about how we felt about ourselves, we would naturally care more about the environment around us. So it's like the keystone habit to fixing the environment is fixing the individual.
Steve.
Yeah.
Steve.
Yeah.
I'm getting a message. I'm getting a message here.
Oh, shit.
We're getting a call
Uh-oh.
from ChuckTalks.
ChuckTalks.
Have you guys ever met ChuckTalks?
Is he like your twin brother
Here,
or
let's
something?
see if we can patch him in. He's actually my cousin.
Oh, your cousin, okay.
We're gonna patch in ChuckTalks.
ChuckTalks, come on in.
Seeing through the telescope, what is it called? The crystal ball?
Hey everybody, this is ChuckTalks.
ChuckTalks.
ChuckTalks wants to make a prediction. I've been listening to Steverdamus, and I like his predictions. He's been pretty good, but I'm gonna make a prediction. Y'all ready?
Go ahead, ChuckTalks.
Wait, Charles, is it okay if Chuck Steverdamus makes a prediction?
I mean, I guess so, dude. I haven't talked to you in a while. How come you didn't call me back last week? My bad, Charles. I've been busy. I've been trying to, work on my game. Trying to get in the paint and bang. Mm-hmm. All right, cool. I hear you.
I feel you, ChuckTalks.
Anyway, so I was trying to make a prediction before my little cousin there was trying to mess with me. So my prediction is this. We have seen a Green Party in the United States. Y'all might remember Ralph Nader.
I do remember Ralph.
Y'all might remember...
don't blame him for Al Gore's laws.
That is true. Y'all might remember, I think it was Dennis Kucinich. Might have been a Green Party cat.
Yeah, he was out of Ohio. I met him in Iowa, by the way. Yeah, he's a vegan. He's a vegan.
That's right. And
he's also like 4'11".
That's right. He's 4'10" and a half, but he wears elevator
Platform
shoes.
shoes, yeah.
That's right. So I dunked on him one time, but anyway, what I was trying to say is you were talking about Barack, and you were talking about how it was a missed opportunity with the environment, and you were talking about some of these environmental issues with Heidi, my girl Heidi. What's up? And I predict, Chuck-O-Damas predicts, that we're gonna see a rise of a Green Party. That we have seen this in Germany, and I think there will be a candidate and a party that will be their purpose, when they will seek to combine capitalism, government, but it will be environment, climate. That will be their objective and their platform, and that will be something that will happen in American politics in the next 15, 20 years.
ChuckTalks,
Thanks, ChuckTalks. Good to hear from you, dog.
All right, ciao. Bye.
Cool. I got to go. Peace.
I don't think that that's a bad prediction in the Steverdamus sphere. I think you're seeing a younger generation that's more quote unquote woke to the concept of we have to be environmentalists first and foremost. I'm not confident that it's gonna catch on mainstream. Why? All good conversations are circular.
Why are you tripping on me, Steve?
Why?
Hey, ChuckTalks, you're back.
Why is very simple. Is the older generations are still who control the halls of Congress.
Yeah, well, if we get some of these old dudes out of here, you know.
ChuckTalks has joined and stayed for a while.
Y'all didn't invite me, so the door was open. I was just kidding.
What are you intending there, ChuckTalks, to get rid of the old people? ChuckTalks?
I think he left.
Oh.
But I did talk to him about this a couple weeks ago. Last time he returned one of my calls, and what he was telling me was
we might have to edit ChuckTalks out.
Oh no!
Hey,
Chuck
don't edit
Rodamus
my
is staying
cousin.
in.
Don't edit my cousin. Why you gonna edit my cousin, man? What are you trying to say? I can't believe you want to edit my cousin out. That's cold.
I'm not saying, dude. I'm not picking on ChuckTalks.
That's cold.
I just don't think very people are going to relate to ChuckTalks.
Well, you know, that's all right. He's his own man. I mean, he's always kind of been like a, odd duck in the family.
All right,
But
yeah.
you know,
That's all right. Well, he's
His
welcome.
uncle-
He's welcome back to
uncle
the
was
show
in-
anytime.
his uncle was in jail for trying to pass counterfeit nickels, and that sort of traumatized him. I mean, he was only in jail for 3 days, but
All right. Well,
those 3 days were hard.
he's welcome to the show anytime.
Cool. I'll tell him. I think actually we need to go to a commercial break.
I got you, buddy.
I need to go to a commercial break, if you know what I'm saying. I need to
All
go.
right.
I need to go see a man about a horse.
I guess during the commercial break,
I'll
how
see if
about-
ChuckTalks is still here.
I have a question actually.
No, ChuckTalks is not allowed back on the
I
show.
thought I saw his Camaro.
I mean, no, he is allowed on the show, just not this
Already
episode.
banned him? All right.
I just saw his Camaro with the flames on the side. It's still in the parking lot, and I'm gonna tell him you said that. But
Here's my question for you two to think during the break, and hopefully I'll get an answer.
break ponder.
Break ponder. How important, useful, practical is it to the movements to tear down these Civil War statues?
That's a great question. I thought that would come up this episode.
An excellent question.
Don't answer. Think about it.
All right.
Now back to the show.
I'm gonna roll on this. Actually, this is good stuff.
All right, here we go. Are we rolling? All right, we're back. So,
In my 5.0 with my rag
Top
top
down
down,
so my hair
can
can
blow.
girlie's on the standby, just
Waiting
waiting
just
to
to
say
say
hi.
hi.
Did you stop?
Nah, I just rolled by.
Cruising to the
Right
next
back
one.
to the pod, Jabber.
Right. So we're back.
All right. So we're back better than ever.
yo.
Hey, but the last question Jeb had, and I did think about it as I was eating popcorn. I mean,
What are you trying to say?
That's what I was doing.
Why it got to be popcorn?
Because I like popcorn.
Good point.
All right. So Jeb asked, correct me if I'm wrong, is
You're wrong.
What do you see with all that's happening with the removal of statues, mainly Confederate based, or if people would call them white supremacist statues? I have a lot of opinions.
Actually, I don't think anyone would call them white supremacist statues, but they might call them white supremacist statues.
Okay, because
I was playing.
right.
Sorry, Steve. I interrupted you. Continue.
so the first thing that comes to my mind is that people who live in a culture want to feel like they have power. And I think it's a way, and in a good way, that people who have been repressed by society, maybe not our society as much as prior societies, feel like they're being listened to. And so for that, I applaud the removing of a statue. Period. The end. However, I think there is a silent majority that people like Donald Trump tap into that will be like, hey, I'm not being heard now. Like, that individual, I may not always agree with, but he has noble characteristics that I believe in. And people, oh, you're white supremacist and you believe in slavery. There's a lot of Southerners who do not believe in slavery that do believe in fighting for a cause. just like people who are fighting for a cause to take down the statue believe in fighting for a cause, which to me is kind of like the oxymoronic aspect of it, is that Southern soldiers who are immortalized, I guess would be the word, in statues on a lot of town squares in the South are immortalized because they fought for a cause, and the people taking them down are fighting for a cause. So there's just some...
It's a really tricky one, isn't it?
Yeah,
I mean,
it really is.
I'm really torn on it. At first, it
And then
seems
I
simple.
have the conspiracy theory after this.
Oh yes.
All right, sorry. Can I comment on what you just said?
Yeah.
And
Go
then-
ahead.
So my first response to the thing you just said, Jeb, and I had thought about recently and talked about with other people, was, these are symbols of things that have not aged well. You know, you don't necessarily continue to like say and do things that have now been determined to be racist, you know, or just offensive. Or and that sort
Which is
of
good.
fits with which is
is
good,
good.
and that
Yeah.
sort of fits with what we were saying earlier about younger generations kind of having an energy and like a vogue.
See what
and
happens when you have
like-
old people running shit? You
well,
have slavery.
I mean, when I use the term progressive, what I mean is like improvement. Like I
Yes,
see progress
absolutely.
as like someone who's 30 may see
and
things
conserve
better.
is trying to maintain.
Maintain status quo, but that's
Yeah.
not always bad because
Yeah,
you
it's
do
true,
want to
too.
conserve. Well, I mean, people have been able to evolve and grow because they've been doing certain things all along too. Not to just change everything every generation, right? I mean, you got to keep some things, right?
And that's what we're debating. No, I
And then
totally agree.
so that's why I then went to the second thought of some people respect certain aspects of those statues, and if you're just saying, well, because we think this, we should rip them down, aren't you disrespecting people who have a different view?
yes, in a
And
way.
now I'm kind of at the point of like they should stand, and there should be a plaque that should say this is a controversial display.
And they should go to the museum.
Well, maybe, or just that it should stand for a disagreement.
That's a great
It
idea.
should stand for some people see it this way and some people see it
Kinda
because
like
it's
leave the graffiti
actually
on the statue.
A piece of rock,
I
guys.
like that. Leave the graffiti. I think it's a really great
Well, now that
compromise.
that's interesting too because there is someone who made the statue, and so it's a piece of art.
I saw
So that would also be.
I saw a documentary on statues.
Sort of shitting
it
on
was
the artist.
mainly made by the Daughters of the Confederacy, the Southern statues we're talking about. And like a lot of people like argue they try to whitewash history and that they and I listen, there is no way in which my modern mentality can justify slavery. It's terrible, it's horrible, it's no good, it's a very bad day. But the Daughters of the Confederacy tried to justify it partly. That's partly the truth. But speaking as a Southern white man, and I can understand how it can be misconstrued as, in the bad sense, as I'm a racist. In the good sense, it's I'm privileged. And I get that. And I totally accept that. But speaking as a Southern white man, open and honestly, the Confederate soldier means more to me than slavery. Like it actually has very little to do with slavery, if anything at all. What it has to do with is the idea of fighting for something you believe in. And just like I wear a Black Lives Matter mask, I'm not joking. Like I literally wear a Black Lives Matter mask because that's something I believe in. People ask me why I wear it because I simply answer it because they matter. Like I don't know any other way to say it. Like Black lives fucking matter. Like how else can I say it? That's a noble cause. And you know what a Confederate soldier represents to me? A noble cause. Now, it represents slavery. No, it represents fighting for something you believe in.
Well, that's what I'm saying is it's like if there's just a statue of a guy on a horse who is a Confederate leader. Is that what some of these ones we're talking about?
Yes, that's
just
pretty
like
much all
someone's
of it.
name or someone's likeness in statue form by himself, just a guy on a horse or whatever.
Yeah.
You can just put a plaque up that says these are the things that this guy did that were noble, or how you can see him.
And these are the things he
positively.
didn't do
And these
noble.
are the things that were shitty, that also happened. And this is the conflicting viewpoints on this piece of art.
I actually.
But now there was a Teddy Roosevelt outside of a museum in New York. It might have been the Met that had like a little African American guy and like a little Native American guy, and they were like standing down there, and he's like up on a horse, and they took it down, and there was just like I think visually it was just very demeaning.
Right.
And I think that's almost worse. Like if it's visually demeaning, if you got some like black dude like dragging a fucking like plow or something, like that's fucked up to look at.
Right.
It's not fucked up to look at a dude on a horse.
Right.
I think you could have taken those other two guys down and had Teddy Roosevelt. Because then you could have had the conflicting views on a president who did some positive things,
but with all
you can't just have like two little guys of color that he's just like crapping on visually like that to me.
Right,
I think that's problematic.
Yeah, it's supremacist.
It's just offensive every time you see it.
Right, but like, I had a big debate with a bunch of my like chat group friends because like people think they understand the complexity of race in the South and they don't get it unless you're from the fucking South. Like, being three men from the South on this podcast, we fucking get it. Like, we get the difficulty. We get the
We're
challenge.
not black men from the South.
We're not black men.
White men from the South.
We get the difficulty and the complexity of the issue. And it's, I don't know. I'm not, by any stretch of the imagination, stating, and let me finish my point before you jump down my throat, stating that I understand the complexity of the challenging of being a black male from the South. I'm not stating that.
Right.
What I am stating is I understand that there is a complexity to it.
Sure.
And
no,
so
I think you're right, and I think it is different being from the South for sure, especially if you have experiences with cultures other than your own.
And like, oh, well, you sit on a throne of entitlement and this and that. Maybe I do. Maybe that is a true statement. But as we say on the show, multiple things can be true. I can also sit on the throne of entitlement and also understand the complexity of an issue. I can also sit on the throne of entitlement and offer suggestions of how to resolve the complexity of the issue. And it's like, it's very, very challenging situation in the South. More so for black men than white men. Why? I've said this before on previous podcasts. Mainly it has to do with equality of wealth, not equality of action or of belief or of political power. It has to do with equality of wealth. And there's just a lot more wealth in the white sector in the South, in the white sector pretty much anywhere in the world, than the black sector. There's several reasons for that. Slavery is one of them. Totally.
I think slavery is a big one, yeah.
Slavery is a massive one. There's also the mentality of the white conqueror. There's also like people like, oh man, the Native Americans, they were so violent. You know who were fucking violent? Norwegians. Those motherfuckers. Scandinavian Vikings. Those motherfuckers were violent. They also understood the concept of saving because they had a winner to survive. So they understand the concept of saving. And guess who survives in a capitalist world? People who are aggressive. And guess who also survives? People who understand the concept of saving. So if you have a big-ass white Norwegian Viking going against a guy who's like, hey, there's probably going to be some mangoes here tomorrow. I don't really give a shit. Like, who's going to win that war?
Sadly, tragically, the fucking guy on the beach with the mangoes is a lot more, like, happy and peaceful, presumably.
Yeah, presumably, yeah.
And that's a real, like, interesting thing about why did the Western Europeans go out to fucking wreak this havoc on everybody? What was there? I mean, couldn't you just hang out?
It was cold as fuck. They didn't want to be.
Couldn't you just hang out at home and smoke a bowl? What the fuck, man? Relax.
No, but there's a really interesting graph. We're tangentializing. Oh, shiny object squirrel. Woo, woo, woo. There's a really interesting graph where you can literally draw the equator, and then you can draw the value of wealth, and you can draw away from it, and literally the median household income of wealth goes up exponentially the further you move away from the equator. Huh. And the simple reason why is people by the equator don't have much stress. Everything's easy. Fishing is easy. You just, taking a mango off the tree is easy. You don't need a shelter to protect you from the winter storm. Now you go up to northern fucking Sweden and you have to plan 8 months out of the year to survive 4 months out of the year. You have to fucking deal with extreme environmental challenges. You have to deal with all these issues. It's not better or worse. It's just a fact, And it's like, oh, well, you're a supremacist. I'm not a supremacist. Like, here's one of my favorite things to tell people. And I was thinking about it this morning. I was listening to NPR, and they're talking about reparations, and they're talking about like the idea of making black people whole by giving them money. And I'm not necessarily against that. Like, Steverdamus is not against that. I'll listen to the concept. I'll listen to how it's going to play out, this and that. But if you think that's what's going to make us equal, I don't know what you're smoking, but I'd like to try some.
It doesn't have any value if you don't make it yourself and earn it yourself and produce it yourself. And so there's no reason to just give people things if you want them to make growth.
But another example is, let's say you take a Native American from Arizona, the Hopi Indian tribe, a very peaceful Indian tribe. Take the way they look, take the way they speak, take everything, and go put them in Norway, 1500s. Take the Norwegians, take the way they look, take the way they speak, take the way they act, and put them in 500 years ago in the Hopi Indian tribes. I guarantee you the Hopi Indians would have come over and conquered the Norwegians. It's just, it's meaning that it has nothing to do with the way you look or the way you act. It has to do with the byproduct of where you come from.
Right.
That's my point. And I really think about it. Like, people I'll never forget this guy. It's very controversial what he said, but he's like, take, the Upper West Side, nicest part of New York City, full of like a bunch of fucking super wealthy bankers and Wall Street traders and $1 million penthouses, many $1 million penthouses and Van Goghs and portraits. Take them, put them in Harlem, put them in like 125th, worst street in New York. Take the people in Harlem and put them in the Upper West Side. In 5 years, Harlem would be the Upper West Side, and in 5 years, the Upper West Side would be Harlem. And it's not an attack on the people from Harlem. It's not saying because they're black or because these guys are rich Jews or rich, brokers. It's a mentality. It's an idea. It's a concept.
But I would say if you took those people and switched them at birth.
Oh, yeah, totally. Yes.
They probably would be the same.
Yes, I agree.
Because the mentality probably came from privilege and raising and education and all those things.
Right. And so, people are like, well, do you know how privileged you sound? I totally get it. I totally get how privileged I sound right now. But I'm not saying this because I think I'm right. I'm saying this because I think this is how it is. Like, you have to understand that. Like, I'm not trying to piss anyone off. I'm not trying to sound like a racist. I'm not trying to say like a supremacist. I'm trying to make sure that everyone understands what I believe the facts of the situation are so we can work to make them better.
Well, so let's go back to Germany again, because I talked about Germany last time I was on the pod, and I talked about how they did a much better job reparation, not like just an emotional reparation, owning it and saying
a recognition,
what the sin was, and just like making it known that there was like a national commitment to like making this right. And I guess you would say, I've been to Germany a couple times. They've made those. I went to Dachau, and they've made those concentration camps museums and places where you can go.
Yeah, like
and it's kind of like a never forget type of deal. I mean, I'm sure they don't have like statues of Hitler up in the town squares and shit. I mean, I don't know how they've treated, but like my point is, you don't want to erase history and act like it never happened.
Right.
You want to have, I think that's why I'm arguing for like multiple plaques or like, yeah, moving things to museums or making things museums is a good idea too. Maybe I don't necessarily need a Confederate soldier on like every corner of every capital city in like the South. Right. Maybe it's fine to put Chuck D on one of those and stuff. And just
totally.
Like, put some more contemporary people that maybe have a represent a more progressive.
Chuck D on a statue.
Yeah, well, he's from New York.
Easy E would be.
Who should go on the Raleigh statue? Like if you had to pick like the best Raleigh people.
P.D. Pablo.
Yeah, P.D. Pablo could get P.D. Pablo could get a horse.
P.D. Pablo, North Carolina, come on and raise up.
I think Michael Jordan would probably have the top spot.
Dale Earnhardt, Michael Jordan. Imagine a statue of like Dale Earnhardt.
Mike was actually born in Brooklyn.
Richard Petty. Like, imagine a statue of like Michael in the
Vince
middle
Carter.
and Richard and Dale holding up each other's hands, like holding them up high in the air. Like, now that's a statue I could get behind right there. Like,
wait, who did you say?
Dale Earnhardt on one side, put Michael Jordan in the middle, and make the black guy the most important. Like, let's keep it politically correct here, and put Dale Earnhardt on one side and Richard Petty on the other, all holding up themselves, hands up in the air like champions.
While in
that'd be pretty
Mustang
pimp.
Convertible.
No, out the sunroof of the Mustang convertible.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's got to be a Mustang.
Yeah.
I do want to...
that would be so much better. Our capital would be so much more rock and roll if we had Michael Jordan, Dale Earnhardt, and Richard Petty in a Mustang.
Oh, dude.
I like what you were saying, Steven.
Go ahead.
You're not defending slavery,
No.
but you're also not against the Confederate soldier. And that's exactly how I feel. Like, I think the Confederate soldier is great for standing up for what he believes. But
And that believing something can be wrong is also part of the equation.
right. Yeah, exactly. Like, I'm not against Confederate soldiers. I am against slavery, and I am for black lives. It's like a weird.
It's a really weird, and like I think that like this whole concept of like, and listen, I get it. Like, people want to be heard, especially if they have not. And if you want us to take down statues, let's take down statues.
Yeah.
If you want us, but I'm gonna get to the conspiracy theory here in a second.
Yeah.
If you want us to take down the flag, we'll take down the flag. I had an idea of like I want to call it like the New South or New Equity, and I want to keep the flag, but I want to redraw the flag. So you have the 13 stars, you have the red, you have the blue, you have the white, and you draw an E, or you draw a for equity, or you draw an infinity symbol out of the stars, and you say this is the New South. This is like we recognize we had some good, we recognize we had some bad, and now we're gonna make better. And so like, I kind of like the idea of like that as like a tattoo or a symbol, meaning like I recognize we have a checkered past, but not all of it's bad. And I think that that's what you're saying, and what I'm saying is we've had a difficult past. That doesn't mean it's bad. Now, with that said, if my fellow citizens of North Carolina need to see a statue come down or need to see a flag come down, I get it.
Yeah.
And that I'm fair with that. Yeah. I'm not arguing with you. But here comes the conspiracy theory.
By the way, one of the first ones was on the UNC campus.
Yeah, Silent Sam. Yeah,
Silent Sam.
Where I went to fucking law school.
Activist thing several years ago. Now.
Yeah, it was Silent Sam was up when I was there in law school, and then he came down shortly thereafter. And he's in a museum now, which is where I believe he belongs. Just like the Confederate soldier at the top of the statue in downtown Raleigh, I believe he just go to a fucking museum. That's where you belong. There's a lot of.
Nothing wrong with having a Civil War museum.
Yeah.
Have a fat Civil War museum and put them all in there and let you go and learn about it. If you're really into Civil War history, cool. I mean, it's
learn it so you don't repeat it.
Well, also, the Holocaust Museum, it's very vital to have a Civil War museum.
That's what I'm saying. And in Germany, there are multiple. I mean, like I think a lot of those. I think Auschwitz and a lot of those sites have been turned into museums. Mm-hmm. I mean, what the hell else are you gonna do? You want to build like a retirement complex? Like people don't want to live there. You know, it's creepy. I mean, you see the.
I've been several times to the
showers and shit.
I've been several times.
A lot of the dorms.
I've been several times to the museum, the Holocaust Museum in Washington D.C.
That museum's really intense.
It's very powerful. It's very disturbing really and powerful, but it's good to be disturbed and powerful. That's how you don't repeat. This
that's
shit.
kind of what I'm saying. But the other thing that I'm saying is that it seems to me like I was just thinking while you were talking. It's not the same to me as the. I think people mistake it for the controversy about kneeling for the national anthem.
Mistake what?
Kneeling for the national anthem gets interpreted as you're dissing on America, and people are saying, I'm not dissing on America, I'm trying to protest something we typically do that's sacred to say there's something wrong with our country.
And I agree with that.
And now the Civil War thing, people are, I think, sort of misinterpreting. If you're saying the statues should just be destroyed, not even in favor of like a museum or whatever, you're seeing the pro-Confederacy as rah-rah America. And I don't think that's what it is. I think it's a nobility for a group of people that had like a certain bravery to stand up and fight for a region, a territory, a set of ideas that were separate from racism and
I try
and slavery.
Very hard to explain to people that in how I see history, and they can tell you, well, it's completely wrong. You completely don't understand it. Coming from someone who I remember my great-grandmother who was born in 1880 and who was my father, the sun could rise and set on him with her. And I can remember several stories she told me as well as stories that my father has told me about their lives, meaning she was born in 1880, meaning her father had fought in the Civil War, about being sharecroppers, meaning they were just super poor fucking Southern white people. Sure, they had more more luck than a black person in the South and all that other stuff. Like I totally get it. I'm not arguing that. I'm just saying They were poor, and it was tough on them as well. And how the Northern Sherman, the general, in 1864 did his march to the sea, basically from Raleigh to Atlanta, and he burned and slashed and raped and killed and murdered hundreds of thousands of Southerners, destroying everything in his path, because that's the only way. It was slash and burn. It was the way to bring the South to its knees. That's the people who fought back against that is like fighting back against tyranny. They were not fighting for slavery at that point. They were fighting for their lives at that point. And that's noble to me. Just like a black man who doesn't want to die to a police officer choking him out. That's noble to me. Like
because the point is that you're fighting Sherman, who was a fucking dick, they were coming down here to just slaughter people.
And yes, and then shortly thereafter, it was I believe the stat, and I don't believe this is wrong. It was 25-1, female to male in the South. There is no male between the age of 8 and 30 left. And the North came down and carpetbagged the fuck out of the South and just like, oh, cheap labor down there, the cheap land down there, we're going to go take it all over. And there's a prideful group of people who are like, fuck you, no, you're not. And I don't think that it's wrong for fighting in something that you believe in. That doesn't mean it's slavery. I think that's the whole point.
I think what you're saying, that I think the reason slavery can be ancillary in that sense is it's your territory, it's your family, it's your livelihood, and that's what people were thinking about, and that's what was triggering their response. And they were not necessarily, and most of them weren't slave owners.
No, it's a complete farce.
And so they didn't have that. I mean, they weren't standing up for integration, but they also weren't standing up for owning slaves because they didn't have the money to own anybody.
Most Southern white men who died in the Civil War were sharecroppers. By like a large percentage.
Only 1 in 10?
1 in 20, something like that, yeah.
Southerner had owned a slave.
And
that might be wrong. It might be less than that. You can look it up.
My whole point is like standing up for what you believe in is a noble thing to do. Standing up for slavery is not. What I'm saying is these people often stood up for what they believed in, and it wasn't slavery. Like it was just part of.
I think you're
like, you're whitewashing history
No, all you're doing is just making a point for the fact that if you put a statue up of a guy who died in a war, there's a chance that he died for something other than why you think he died. So it's legitimate to have a plaque up that says this guy died for a cause he believed in and he inspires me. And there's also a cause to have a plaque up that says this guy was involved in a conflict that largely had to do with slavery and racism, and I don't support this statue standing right in this location. I want everybody to be aware that, this is...
And I totally get it's privileged.
Offensive.
I totally get it's privileged. I totally get that if I were a black man in the South, I would probably see it differently. I totally get that. And I'm not saying that I'm right. I'm saying that the statue should come down. I'm saying the flag should be lowered. I'm saying I'm giving you everything you are asking for, society. All I'm asking is, can you hear that my belief in it once was about nobility and not being a fucking racist? Like, don't call me a racist.
That's what I'm saying.
I'm anything but a fucking racist. And people who know me well can definitely attest to all of that. Like,
sure.
It fucking drives me crazy that people are like, oh, and I'm not like, listen, you win, flag comes down, you win, Confederate soldiers gone, you win, done. It was terrible, but all I'm asking is just that I'm heard, that it has to do with nobility, it has to do with fighting with something you believe in, and like if I were an artist, which I'm not, I would love to like get photographs of like black men, white men, brown men, green men, blue men, purple men with the Confederate soldier, because I think it says so much. I think it says so powerful because they were both people who were noble.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think really what you're saying, and I don't think anyone's calling you a racist, but I think what you're saying is if the statue stands for something else for you, then that's legitimate. And I think that's right. And that's what I've come to conclude, especially because it's a piece of art. And so It's up for interpretation. And if it's just a person on a horse, what it means to you is private. What it means to you is what it means to you. If a group of public people decide that it means something offensive, that's fine, and put up a sign that says that. But I don't really think it's good for society to just take it down, break it, throw it away, act like it never happened.
That's the worst thing. That's how you're going to repeat it.
I don't understand. I don't see why that's a good idea.
So I mean, but I haven't gotten to the conspiracy, Joe.
Okay. Oh, snap.
All right.
By the way, before you just one quick, I'm not sure if this is true or not, but it said 32% on average of white families own slaves.
Okay, it's higher than I thought. That's higher.
32%.
32%, and like some states were higher, but like as a average of all the states, 32. They didn't. I couldn't find a percentage.
That's a lot higher than I thought.
Yeah, I thought it was like one of the.
Can I look at it?
Yeah.
It could be. Also, you could look at it like where it's like, did they own one or did they own 100? You know,
Right.
it's probably,
one.
just like wealth is today. Yeah. Just like wealth is today, there was probably one guy who owned 1,000 and everyone else had one. No,
it didn't say how many soldiers had slaves. Then I mean, I don't know if they could figure that or not. But,
no.
Yeah.
But I think the point of it is that, listen, and I get it. There's probably people like, no Southern white person wants to be like, oh yeah, my family owned slaves. Proud of that. Like, just like I don't think any German wants to be like, yeah, my dad was an SS officer and he gassed Jews. Like, no one's proud of that. But I don't think that saying that every German in 1945 was gassing Jews is a true statement too. Just like I don't think saying everyone in 1860 in the South owned slaves. And I think that's the whole point, right? It doesn't make it better. It doesn't make it worse. No one's trying to whitewash history. Like, I hear you. Like, the other side, other people at the table, I hear you. You're frustrated. You're angry. I've already told you how I think the best way to fix it is. Let's decriminalize 95% of behavior in the United States. That will be the first stepping stone to equality, especially financial equality. You can't make money when you're in jail. You can make it for somebody else, but you can't make it for yourself. So that's where my head's at. But the conspiracy, I haven't got a conspiracy theory.
Oh, snap dizzles.
All right. So my conspiracy is this. That you see and it's not, like I said, we talked about this in previous podcasts. When I say a conspiracy, I don't think it's like, you know, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde sitting behind closed doors like Austin Powers going, I'm going to just do this, and that's going to be it, and we're going to trick everyone. Like, I don't see that as a conspiracy. A conspiracy to me is just Machiavellian in a way, and I wanted to talk about Machiavelli earlier in the podcast. But people who have everything to gain from real change have none of the power. Everybody who has everything to lose in change have all the power. And so I think that you see a white majority, and maybe it's me too, right? Like maybe it's me too. That is like maybe I'm part of the conspiracy and I don't even know I'm part of the conspiracy.
It's a big conspiracy.
And that's a huge conspiracy when I don't even know I'm participating in it.
Double.
And that's like the devil's advocate you were talking about earlier. But maybe it's a situation where people are like, okay, take the goddamn statues. Take down the fucking flag. I don't give a shit. I just want your money. You know, and it's just like, like the people of NASCAR, like you see NASCAR, you see like the NFL's had a come to Jesus moment. No, they had we're going to lose money if we keep doing this moment. They didn't have a come to Jesus moment. It was capitalism that made them change.
Wow.
And so,
yeah, back to our original point.
Back to the environment. Like the thing that blew me away was the NASCAR, Bubba Wallace. You know, this Bubba, shout out North Carolina. Like the thing that blew me away is like they know their demographic way more than we know their demographic. Oh, NASCAR fans are a bunch of racists and want to fly the Confederate flag. Oh, no, they're not. Because if that were true, they would never have done that. Because it's all about the fucking paper. It's all about capitalism. It's all about making money. And so NASCAR saw an opportunity to stand on the right side of history and keep 80% of their fans. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't fucking NASCAR fans who like Confederate flags. There is a group of white assholes out there that are fucking racist and terrible people. Show me who they are,
Well,
and
it's
we'll
not
get
that many.
exactly. It's the same. It's the same. But this is what I'm saying is the powers that be. This is the conspiracy. The powers that be are just like being like, you guys go fight over this. Go fight over a flag. Ignore the fact. Ignore the fact that, I wanted to stay alive at 75 and still be able to go to Starbucks and fucking shut down society so I could do that. Ignore that fact. You guys, yeah, definitely. Statues. Like, ignore the fact I'm a fucking retard and I don't know how to fucking run the government. Statues. Flags, statues. It's just like, you want to hear the conspiracy. And like I said, maybe me wasting my time talking about this, and shout out Heidi again, and not talking about planet Earth, like not talking about the fucking bullshit, like these motherfuckers know exactly what they're doing. They got so much money, so much power, so much wealth beyond. And it doesn't matter. It's like Oprah Winfrey. It's like LeBron James. They're black. They got a ton of money and a ton of power, and they know how to flex it. So does, Mr. NASCAR and Mr. fucking NFL and Mr. whatever else. And so that's the conspiracy, is that I think my conspiracy, as defined, is there's always going to be a subconscious conspiracy. It does, like I said, I don't think it's like fucking Bill Gates and George Soros and the Wuhan lab like making fucking Chinese viruses. But there's always going to be like someone like Fauci, and we talked about this last week on the podcast about
Fauci
Chucky.
Dizzles.
Fauci Dizzles. Shout out Fauci. Go on the show, buddy. I would love to have Fauci.
Come on,
Fauci. Come on, don't be afraid. But like,
we'll wear masks. It's fine.
we'll wear masks. Even though you told us it was safe not to wear a mask on March 18th, Fauci. But like the whole point is like people are part of a conspiracy and they don't even realize they're part of a conspiracy. And then it's kind of like, Alice in Wonderland shit, and I get it, but it's challenging. So maybe I am the conspiracy of the conspiracy.
I think that is a great closing thought. Charles,
Crazy.
anything to add to Steven's conspiracy?
That's crazy.
All right.
I think ChuckTalks came back.
ChuckTalks
Blew my mind.
This is the other cousin.
Hey man, why you didn't call me?
Oh, ChuckTalks is back.
Hey, you're back.
Hey guys.
But do you understand the conspiracy of the conspiracy? So like maybe when you think there's a conspiracy, you are the conspiracy.
Yeah.
It's a conspiracy. I'm about to eat one of them pickles in your fridge.
Just known fact, my wife and I love pickles. We have tons of pickles, and now I have to explain why ChuckTalks is going to be eating pickles in the fridge.
I predict I'm about to be eating some pickles here real quick. Quickles.
All right, guys. As always,
Why you got a clown on ChuckTalks?
when you're the head of the Steverdamus show, you get, or the Chuck Talk of the Steverdamus, you get to have the closing argument. And I guess I want to say what I always say. At the end of the day, I love each and every one of you. I understand some things I say might be painful, they might be hurtful, they might be controversial. If that's true, I'm not apologizing. It just means that we all need to think a little bit more. Love you guys.
And it's not my fault that you're a baby.
That was Chuck, not even ChuckTalks. Love you guys. Have a good night.
Chuck and Steverdamus are not doctors, certified or endorsed by anyone, really. Just two guys trying to make sense of everything.